The Epistle to the Colossians. The letter to Colossians was written by Paul. Despite his well-known and honorable mission to spread the gospel of Jesus, Paul was not always such a firm believer. In fact, Paul led a life notorious for persecuting and imprisoning anyone who belonged to the way. One day on the road to Damascus, Paul had an encounter with Jesus which resulted in the most radical transformation of his life. Almost immediately, Paul begins to preach to anyone that would listen, that Jesus is the Son of God. This marked the beginning of Paul's remarkable 31-year-long ministry. His journey was filled with persecution and backlash. However, he was proud to suffer for the ultimate goal of spreading God's word. Even though he had suffered through being flogged, beaten, pelted with stones, shipwrecked, jailed, and much more, Paul writes, "That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." During his first imprisonment in Rome, Paul wrote this letter to the Colossians, along with his letters to the Ephesians, the Philippians, and Philemon. Paul is credited with starting several churches. However, the church in Colossae was started by Paul's colleague, Epaphras. The Christians in this area faced many cultural pressures that tempted them into a diluted version of Christianity. Colossae was on a major trading route to the east, which proved to be a perfect breeding ground for pagan beliefs, and the early Christian converts were continuously hearing new variations of the gospel. During Paul's imprisonment, Epaphras visited him and informed him about the state of the church in Colossae. Although the Colossians knew Jesus, they comfortably weaved him in as another deity alongside their angel worship and Greek philosophy. So Paul wrote this letter to the Colossians to encourage them to address these issues and challenge them to greater devotion to God. Rather than attacking each belief point by point, Paul countered with a positive theology. Paul wrote this letter as a warning against false teachings and encouraged the believers in their growth towards Christian maturity. Throughout this letter, Paul declares that Christ is enough. He is God, the fullness of God, the one who made the world, and the reason that everything exists. The fullness of God lived, died, and came back from death for us. So then, the question that Paul would ask the Colossians and us is, why settle for counterfeits?